Marcus Bellamy had 42 years, a culinary degree from one of the best schools in the country, and absolutely nothing left to lose. He stood behind the grill of a failing diner, flipping burgers for minimum wage, watching his life tick away one burnt patty at a time. 5 years ago, his name had been in magazines. Now it was nowhere. But on one rainy night, everything changed. An elderly woman walked through the door 15 minutes before closing, soaked to the bone, clutching her purse like a lifeline. Most people would have turned her away. Marcus almost did. Instead, he made her soup. His grandmother's recipe. The only thing he still cooked with any piece of his broken heart still intact. What happened next sounds impossible. She gave him a recipe card. Not for food. For something else entirely. Something that made no sense. One act of unexpected kindness. A pinch of patience. 3 minutes of full presence. Marcus thought she was crazy. He had no idea that 5 years earlier, he'd saved her life without knowing it. Had no idea she'd been searching for him ever since. Had no idea that following her strange recipe would create a ripple effect that would touch dozens of lives in ways he'd never see. Because here's the truth about kindness that nobody tells you. It never stops where you think it stops. That coffee you buy a stranger? It saves someone 3 connections away. That moment you spend listening? It prevents a tragedy you'll never hear about. Marcus was about to learn that the hard way. This is the story of how one bowl of soup, one recipe card, and one broken chef discovered that perfect moments aren't found. They're created. And they always come back around. The rain hammered against the diner windows like it had a personal vendetta against Seattle. Marcus Bellamy stood behind the grill, flipping burgers with the mechanical precision of a man who had stopped caring about what he was cooking years ago. 42 years old. Once featured in Food and Wine magazine. Once called the next big thing in Pacific Northwest cuisine. Once. Now he was here. The Bluebird Diner on 5th Avenue, where the coffee was always burnt and the dreams came to die. He glanced at the clock. 8:45. 15 minutes until closing. 15 minutes until he could lock the door, go home to his studio apartment, and pretend tomorrow might be different. It never was. The bell above the door chimed. Marcus didn't look up. He kept scraping the grill, each stroke harder than necessary, metal against metal creating a sound that matched his mood perfectly. "I'm sorry, are you still open?" The voice was soft, hesitant. An elderly woman's voice. Marcus turned, irritation already forming his response. But the words caught in his throat. The woman standing in the doorway looked like she'd been dropped into the ocean. Her gray hair was plastered to her skull, water dripping from her vintage blue coat onto the checkered linoleum. She clutched a worn leather purse against her chest like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She had to be pushing 80. Maybe older. "We close at 9, Marcus said, his voice flat. "Oh." Her face fell. "I understand. I'm sorry to have bothered you." She turned toward the door, and something in Marcus cracked. Something small but sharp, like the first fault line in a dam. "Wait." The woman paused. Marcus sighed, tossing his cleaning rag onto the counter with more force than necessary. "Sit. I'll make you something." Her smile was small but genuine, the kind that reached her eyes and made the wrinkles there deepen into maps of a long life. "Thank you. You're very kind." Kind. The word felt foreign. Marcus hadn't been called kind in a very long time. She settled into a booth near the window, carefully removing her coat and draping it over the seat beside her. Evelyn Walsh. That's what her credit card would say later, though Marcus didn't know her name yet. All he knew was that she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the rain. "What can I get you?" Marcus asked, pulling out his order pad more out of habit than necessity. There was no one else here. No one to impress. "What do you recommend?" He almost laughed. Recommend? At the Bluebird? The menu was a graveyard of frozen foods and shortcuts, everything designed for speed and profit margins, nothing designed for actual human enjoyment. But then he remembered. The minestrone soup, he heard himself say. It's the special tonight. It wasn't on the menu. It was never on the menu. But twice a week, when the diner was quiet and his boss wasn't around, Marcus made his grandmother's recipe. The one thing he still cooked the way food was supposed to be cooked. With attention. With memory. With something that resembled love. That sounds perfect, Evelyn said. Marcus nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. His hands moved on autopilot, pulling vegetables from the walk-in, the good olive oil he kept hidden in the back, the fresh herbs he bought with his own money. The owner would kill him if he knew Marcus was using premium ingredients for a $7 bowl of soup. Marcus didn't care. He diced onions with the knife skills that had once made culinary school instructors pause to watch. Celery, carrots, garlic. Each cut precise, each movement containing muscle memory from thousands of hours of practice. He could do this blindfolded. He had done this in his sleep. The vegetables hit the pot with a satisfying sizzle. The smell of sofrito filled the kitchen, rich and complex, and for just a moment Marcus closed his eyes and let himself remember. His grandmother's kitchen in Portland. Sunday afternoons. The radio playing old jazz standards while she taught him that cooking wasn't about following rules, it was about understanding ingredients, respecting them, coaxing out their best qualities. Food is love made visible, she used to say. Every dish tells a story, Marcus. Make sure yours is worth telling. He'd believed that once. He'd built an entire career on that belief. Until the night everything fell apart. Marcus shook his head, forcing the memory away. He added the tomatoes, the beans, the stock he'd made yesterday from scratch because even here, even in this place, he couldn't bring himself to use the powdered garbage they kept in the pantry. 20 minutes later, he carried the bowl to Evelyn's table. She looked up from the window where she'd been watching the rain, and something in her expression made Marcus pause. She looked like someone waiting for something. Or someone who had stopped waiting a long time ago and was just going through the motions of being alive. He knew that look. He saw it in the mirror every morning. Here you go, Marcus said, setting the bowl down with more care than he'd intended. Careful, it's hot. It smells like heaven, Evelyn said softly. Marcus grunted and turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. Would you mind terribly if I asked you something? He turned back. What? What's your name? Marcus. Marcus. She said it like she was tasting it, rolling it around to see how it fit. That's a strong name. A good name. He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. I'm Evelyn, she continued. And I want you to know, Marcus, that this small kindness you've shown me tonight, letting me in when you were closing, making me this soup, it matters more than you could possibly know. There was something in her voice, something weighted and true, that made Marcus uncomfortable. He wasn't used to gratitude. Not anymore. Not since the incident. It's just soup, he said. No, Evelyn replied, picking up her spoon. It's never just soup. She took her first bite, and Marcus watched her face transform. Her eyes closed. A single tear rolled down her weathered cheek. She chewed slowly, savoring, and when she swallowed, she let out a breath that sounded like relief. Oh, she whispered. Oh, this is made with love. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. When was the last time someone had said that about his food? When was the last time he'd put love into anything? It's my grandmother's recipe, he found himself saying, the words coming out before he could stop them. She taught me to cook. She taught you well. Evelyn took another spoonful, and another, eating with the kind of attention most people reserved for prayer. She must have been a remarkable woman. She was. Past tense. Gone now. 5 years in the ground, and Marcus had barely made it to the funeral because he'd been too busy chasing Michelin stars and Instagram fame. They sat in silence while Evelyn ate. Marcus should have gone back to cleaning, to closing duties, to the 100 small tasks that filled his evenings. Instead, he stood there, watching this stranger find joy in something he'd created. It felt foreign. It felt dangerous. It felt like hope, and Marcus had learned the hard way that hope was the cruelest trick of all. Evelyn finished the soup, setting down her spoon with a satisfied sigh. That was extraordinary, Marcus. Truly extraordinary. Thank you. She reached for her purse, pulling out her wallet, but Marcus waved her off. On the house. I couldn't possibly. You already did me a favor, Marcus said, surprising himself with the truth. It's been a long time since I've seen someone actually enjoy my food. Evelyn studied him with eyes that seemed to see more than they should. Eyes that had witnessed decades of human nature and learned to read between the lines. You were someone important once, she said. It wasn't a question. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. I was someone who thought he was important. There's a difference. What happened? The question was gentle, but Marcus felt it like a punch to the gut. What happened? Everything. Nothing. A moment of weakness that became a viral video that became a career-ending scandal that became this life, this diner, this grinding daily existence of going through the motions. I lost my way, he said finally. Made some mistakes. Burned some bridges. All of them, actually. Evelyn nodded slowly, like she understood more than he was saying. We all lose our way sometimes, Marcus. The question is whether we can find our way back. She stood, gathering her coat, and reached into her purse one more time. I know you said no payment, but I'd like to leave you something anyway. Not money. Something better. She pulled out a recipe card. Old-fashioned, the kind you'd find in a vintage recipe box, yellowed with age and covered in careful handwriting. She placed it on the table between them. Marcus picked it up, frowning. At the top, in elegant script, it read, "The recipe for perfect moments." Below that, instead of normal ingredients, it listed, "One act of unexpected kindness, 2 memories worth keeping. A pinch of patience, 3 minutes of full presence, a generous helping of attention, stir gently with compassion, serve immediately to whoever needs it most." Marcus looked up, confused. I don't understand. Evelyn smiled, and this time it was radiant, transforming her entire face into something beautiful and ageless. You will. When you're ready, you will. She buttoned her coat and walked to the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. Marcus? Your grandmother was right. Food is love made visible. But so is everything else we do. Every choice. Every moment. Every small act of grace we offer to strangers in the rain. The bell chimed as she left, and Marcus stood alone in the empty diner, holding a recipe card that made no sense, wondering if he'd just had a conversation with a lonely old woman or something else entirely. He looked down at the card again. Serve immediately to whoever needs it most. Who needed it most? He had no idea. He barely knew what it was. Marcus slipped the card into his apron pocket and went back to closing the diner. Wiping down tables. Sweeping floors. Counting the register. The same routine he performed every night, mechanical and empty. But as he locked the door and stepped into the rain, his hand found the recipe card in his pocket. The paper felt warm against his fingers, though that was probably his imagination. Probably. He walked home through the wet streets of Seattle, past the closed shops and the late-night bars, past the people huddled under awnings and the taxicabs splashing through puddles. The city moved around him like it always did, indifferent to his existence, too busy with its own stories to care about his. In his studio apartment, Marcus hung his wet coat and pulled the recipe card from his pocket. He stuck it to his refrigerator with a magnet, right next to the past-due utility bill and the takeout menu from the Chinese place downstairs. The recipe for perfect moments, he read aloud to his empty apartment. It was ridiculous. Nonsense. The confused ramblings of an old woman who'd probably lost touch with reality years ago. But that night, for the first time in months, Marcus dreamed about cooking. Real cooking. The kind that fed souls, not just stomachs. The kind his grandmother had taught him. The kind he'd forgotten how to do. And when he woke up the next morning, the recipe card was the first thing he saw. Marcus woke up to his alarm at 5:30, the same time he'd woken up every morning for the past 3 years. He rolled out of bed, showered, pulled on his work clothes. The routine was so ingrained he could do it half asleep. Which he was. He shuffled to the kitchen to make coffee, and that's when he saw it again. The recipe card. Still stuck to his refrigerator, slightly curled at the edges from the humidity. The recipe for perfect moments. In the harsh morning light, it looked even more absurd. One act of unexpected kindness. A pinch of patience. What kind of recipe was that? Marcus pulled it off the fridge, intending to throw it away. Old woman. Nice conversation. Time to move on. He had work in an hour. But his hand wouldn't let go of the card. He stood there in his tiny kitchen, holding this piece of paper like it meant something, feeling ridiculous and confused and strangely awake for the first time in years. Fine, he muttered to nobody. One day. I'll try it for one day and prove it's nonsense. He slipped the card into his wallet and headed out the door. The coffee shop on the corner was packed, as always. Marcus joined the line, scrolling through his phone without seeing it, his mind already at the diner planning prep work. Dice onions. Check inventory. Try not to think about how this was his life now. The line moved slowly. Marcus shifted his weight, impatient. He just wanted his coffee and to get to work. That's when he heard the voice ahead of him. I'm so sorry, could you hold on a second? I thought I had enough, but... The voice was young, female, threaded with embarrassment. Marcus looked up. A young woman stood at the counter, dumping the contents of her messenger bag onto the counter. Coins scattered everywhere. Crumpled dollar bills. She was counting frantically, her cheeks flushed red. The barista waited, expression carefully neutral but eyes flickering to the growing line behind her. $3.75, $3.80, $3.90. The young woman counted, her voice getting smaller with each number. The coffee was $4.25. Marcus could see the price board from where he stood. She was short 35 cents. Maybe 40. I'm sorry, she said, gathering up her coins with shaking hands. I'll just have water. I'm sorry. She was maybe 24, 25. Dark curly hair pulled into a messy bun. Paint stains on her fingers. The kind of person who looked like they survived on coffee and hope and not much else. Marcus thought about the recipe card in his wallet. One act of unexpected kindness. Before he could talk himself out of it, he stepped forward. I've got it. The young woman turned, startled. What? Your coffee. I'll cover it. Marcus pulled out a $5 bill and handed it to the barista. And whatever she wants to eat. No, I can't. The young woman started, but Marcus was already waving her off. It's fine. I remember being broke in my 20s. Trust me, I've been there. The young woman's eyes filled with tears. Actual tears. Over a $4 coffee. Thank you, she whispered. You have no idea. I've been working on this piece for my final critique and I haven't slept in 2 days and I just needed. She stopped, laughing at herself. I'm rambling. I'm sorry. Thank you. Really. Don't worry about it, Marcus said, feeling awkward under her gratitude. He'd bought a stranger coffee, not saved her life. But she looked at him like he had. I'm Zara, she said, extending her hand. Zara Hayes. Marcus. He shook her hand briefly. Well, Marcus, you just restored my faith in humanity. I hope you know that. Marcus collected his own coffee and left before she could say anything else. As he walked to the diner, he felt strange. Light, almost. Like he'd set down something heavy he'd been carrying without realizing it. It was just coffee. 40 cents. Nothing. But it didn't feel like nothing. At the diner, Marcus went through his morning prep. But he kept thinking about Zara Hayes and her paint-stained fingers and the way she'd looked when he'd helped her. Like the world had suddenly become a kinder place. He didn't know that Zara spent the morning in her studio apartment, energized by that small act of grace from a stranger. Didn't know that she finally finished her painting, a piece about connection and compassion in urban spaces. Didn't know that on her way to class that afternoon, inspired and awake and feeling like maybe things would be okay, she would see something that would change everything. Zara was cutting through Pioneer Square when she saw him. An older man, maybe 55 or 60, sitting against a brick wall with a sign that read, "Homeless Veteran. Anything helps." She'd seen him before. Saw him most days, actually, on her walk to the university. She always felt guilty passing by, but she never stopped. She never had anything to give. Barely had enough for herself. But today was different. Today someone had helped her when they didn't have to. Zara stopped walking. She looked at the man, really looked at him for the first time. He had kind eyes. Tired but kind. The kind of face that had stories etched into every line. "Hi," she said, sitting down on the sidewalk beside him. The man looked startled. "Hi. What's your name?" He blinked. "Thomas. Thomas Reed." "I'm Zara. Can I draw you, Thomas?" Now he looked completely confused. "Draw me." She pulled out her sketchbook and a piece of charcoal. "I'm an art student. And I think you have an interesting face. Would that be okay?" Thomas Reed stared at this young woman who'd just sat down beside him like it was the most natural thing in the world. Most people crossed the street to avoid him. This girl wanted to draw him. "I guess so," he said quietly. Zara started sketching. As she drew, she asked questions. Where was he from? What had he done before? What did he miss most about the life he used to have? Thomas found himself talking. Really talking. For the first time in years, someone was listening to him like he mattered. Like he was a person, not just a problem to step around. He told her about the army. About Iraq. About coming home to a country that didn't know what to do with broken soldiers. About the PTSD and the nightmares and the way his marriage had crumbled under the weight of things he couldn't talk about. About losing his job, then his apartment, then everything. Zara listened and drew, her hands moving across the paper with quick, confident strokes. 40 minutes later, she turned the sketchbook around. Thomas looked at the portrait, and his breath caught. The woman had seen him. Not the homeless veteran. Not the guy on the street corner. Him. Thomas Reed. The person he used to be. The person he still was, underneath everything. "That's incredible," he whispered. "It's yours," Zara said, carefully tearing the page from her sketchbook. "So you remember that someone sees you." She stood up, brushing off her jeans. "Take care of yourself, Thomas." He watched her walk away, holding the portrait like it was made of gold. For the first time in 3 years, Thomas Reed felt human. That evening, he counted the money in his cup. $17 and change. He could get dinner. Maybe save some for tomorrow. But that portrait kept staring at him. That face Zara had drawn. The one that looked noble and worthy and alive. Thomas made a decision. He walked 6 blocks to Sacred Heart Hospital, his knees aching with every step. Inside the bright lobby, he found the gift shop. He bought a small bouquet of daisies with his last $12. The cheapest flowers they had, but they were still beautiful. Then he asked the front desk for Rebecca Santos. "Are you family?" the receptionist asked. "No. But she helped me once. I want to say thank you." The receptionist made a call. 5 minutes later, a woman in blue scrubs appeared. Rebecca Santos. 39 years old. Exhausted. Her shift had started at 6 that morning and wouldn't end until 8 that night. "Can I help you?" she asked, not recognizing him. "You probably don't remember me," Thomas said. 3 months ago, I came into the ER. Infected cut on my hand. You stitched me up. You didn't have to be nice. Most people aren't. But you talked to me like I was a person. You asked about my day. You gave me extra bandages and antibiotic ointment and told me to take care of myself. Rebecca's expression softened. I remember. These are for you. Thomas held out the daisies, suddenly feeling foolish. What was he doing? This woman probably got flowers all the time from people who mattered. But Rebecca took them like they were roses. Her eyes got shiny. Thank you, she said. You have no idea how much I needed this today. Rough shift. The roughest. She smiled, but it was thin. Lost a patient this morning. Young kid. Motorcycle accident. Sometimes this job just... She stopped, shaking her head. Sorry. You didn't come here to listen to my problems. We all got problems, Thomas said. Least I can do is listen. They talked for 10 minutes in the hospital lobby. Rebecca told him about the 7-year-old boy who'd coded while she was running the crash cart. About how she'd done everything right and it still wasn't enough. About how sometimes she wondered if she was making any difference at all. Thomas listened. Then he told her about the portrait. About the art student who'd sat with him and made him feel seen. She reminded me that small things matter, Thomas said. You did that for me 3 months ago. Figured I should return the favor. Rebecca looked at this homeless man who'd spent his last dollars on flowers for a nurse who'd shown him basic human decency, and something shifted in her chest. You did return it, she said quietly. Thank you, Thomas. When she went back upstairs for the second half of her shift, Rebecca put the daisies in a vase at the nurse's station. Her co-workers asked where they came from. Someone who reminded me why we do this, she said. Room 412 had been occupied by the same patient for 6 days. Liam Chen, age 8, recovering from emergency appendix surgery but terrified of being alone. His parents could only visit in the evenings because of work, and during the day Liam cried, screamed sometimes, refused to eat, made himself sick with anxiety. The nurses did what they could, but they had 20 other patients and not enough hours in the day. Rebecca Santos walked into room 412 at 4 o'clock with a different energy than she'd had that morning. She sat on the edge of Liam's bed. Hey buddy, she said. I know you're scared. Want to hear a story? Liam, red-faced and miserable, nodded. Rebecca told him about Thomas. About the art student who'd drawn his portrait. About how sometimes the scariest times in our lives are when we discover how kind people can be. Is that true? Liam asked, his voice small. Every word, Rebecca said. And you know what? You're going to be okay. I promise. She stayed for 20 minutes, long past what her schedule allowed. She helped Liam eat his dinner. Read him a story from the children's book cart. Held his hand until he fell asleep. When she left the room, Liam was smiling. Rebecca's shift ended at 8. She walked to her car in the parking garage, bone-tired but lighter somehow. The daisies sat on her passenger seat. At the red light on Madison, she saw a woman standing by the bus stop. Older, maybe 70. Crying quietly into a handkerchief. Rebecca rolled down her window. Are you okay? The woman looked up, startled. Oh, yes. I'm fine. Just a hard day. Do you need a ride somewhere? The woman's face crumpled with relief. Would you mind? The buses aren't running and I can't afford a taxi. Get in, Rebecca said. The woman, whose name was Dorothy, had just come from visiting her husband at a memory care facility. Alzheimer's. He hadn't recognized her today. After 43 years of marriage, he'd looked at her like she was a stranger. Rebecca drove Dorothy home and listened to her talk about love and loss and the small ways we keep going when everything feels impossible. When they arrived at Dorothy's house, Rebecca gave her the daisies. Someone gave these to me today, she said. I think you need them more. Dorothy hugged her, this stranger who'd stopped when everyone else drove past. Meanwhile, across the city, Marcus was closing the diner. It had been a normal day. Breakfast rush. Lunch orders. The usual customers. Nothing special. But he kept thinking about Zara Hayes. About her paint-stained fingers and her genuine gratitude over a $4 coffee. He pulled out the recipe card before leaving. One act of unexpected kindness. He'd done that. Bought someone coffee. That was it, right? The experiment was over. Except it didn't feel over. Marcus walked home through the dark streets, and for the first time in years, he noticed things. A young couple sharing earbuds on the bus. An old man feeding pigeons in the park. A little girl pointing at the moon while her mother smiled. Perfect moments, everywhere. He didn't know about Zara and Thomas. Didn't know about Thomas and Rebecca. Didn't know about Rebecca and Dorothy. Didn't know that his one small act of kindness had rippled outward like a stone thrown into still water, touching lives in ways he'd never see. But he felt something. A shift. A crack in the armor he'd built around himself. That night, Marcus didn't just heat up frozen food. He cooked. Pasta with fresh vegetables and the good olive oil. A simple salad. Bread from the bakery down the street. He set his tiny table like it mattered. Used a real plate instead of eating over the sink. Poured himself a glass of wine. And he tasted his food. Really tasted it. It was good. Not Michelin star good. Not Instagram worthy. Just good, honest food made with attention. Marcus thought about Evelyn Walsh and her strange recipe card. Thought about his grandmother and her Sunday afternoon cooking lessons. Thought about the person he used to be before the fall. Maybe, he thought. Maybe there was a way back. The next morning, Marcus showed up early to the diner. He talked to his boss about changing some menu items. Adding a daily special. Using better ingredients. His boss, surprised but willing, said yes. By the end of the week, the diner had new regulars. People who came specifically for Marcus's food. Who asked what the special was. Who left feeling fed in a way that had nothing to do with calories. Word spread. Slowly at first, then faster. The food critic from the Alt Weekly came by. Wrote a review. Called it unpretentious and soulful. More people came. Marcus started teaching the other line cooks his techniques. Started caring again. Started remembering why he'd fallen in love with cooking in the first place. It wasn't about fame or recognition or Michelin stars. It was about feeding people. Nourishing them. Creating moments of comfort and joy and connection. Perfect moments. 3 months passed. The Bluebird Diner transformed from a dying restaurant into a neighborhood gathering place. Warm. Welcoming. The kind of place where strangers became friends over soup and sandwiches. Marcus transformed too. The bitterness faded. The edges softened. He smiled at customers. Learned their names. Asked about their lives. He became, slowly, the person his grandmother had believed he could be. And then one rainy evening in November, the bell above the door chimed. Marcus looked up from the grill. Evelyn Walsh stood in the doorway, her blue coat dripping water onto the checkered floor, a knowing smile on her weathered face. Marcus froze, spatula in hand, staring at the elderly woman who'd walked into his life 3 months ago and somehow changed everything. Evelyn looked exactly the same. The vintage blue coat. The worn leather purse. Those eyes that seemed to see straight through to the truth of things. "Hello, Marcus," she said softly. He set down the spatula and walked over, wiping his hands on his apron. The diner was full tonight. Every booth occupied. The counter lined with people chatting over coffee and pie. The warm hum of conversation and clinking dishes filled the air. So different from that empty night in August. "Evelyn," Marcus said, and found himself smiling. Actually smiling. "You came back. I told myself I'd give it 3 months," she said, unbuttoning her coat. "See if it took." If what took? She gestured around the transformed diner. "This. The life coming back into this place. Into you." Marcus felt his throat tighten. How did you know? Because I've been watching people for 78 years, dear. You learn to recognize the ones who are drowning, and the ones who might be ready to swim again. She settled into the same booth by the window. Marcus brought her water without being asked. The minestrone soup, he offered. Please. While Marcus cooked, he kept glancing at Evelyn. She sat peacefully, watching the rain, and he realized he'd been hoping she'd come back. Needing her to see what had happened. What she'd started. He made the soup with extra care, the way his grandmother had taught him. Each ingredient treated with respect. Each step given the attention it deserved. When he set the bowl in front of her, Evelyn looked up at him with those knowing eyes. Sit with me, Marcus. Unless you're too busy. Marcus glanced at the kitchen. His sous chef, a young guy named David he'd been training, gave him a thumbs up. They had it covered. He slid into the booth across from Evelyn. She tasted the soup, and her expression melted into contentment. Even better than I remembered. I've been practicing, Marcus admitted. I can tell. She set down her spoon. Tell me what happened. After that night. So Marcus told her. About the recipe card. About buying coffee for a stranger named Zara Hayes. About how that one small act had stayed with him, made him start paying attention to the world again. He told her about changing the menu. About teaching his staff to cook with care. About the slow transformation of the diner from a place people tolerated to a place they loved. I don't know exactly when it shifted, Marcus said. But somewhere along the way, I stopped just going through the motions. I started caring again. About the food. About the people eating it. About showing up and doing something that mattered. Evelyn listened, her soup cooling in front of her, her full attention on his words. The recipe card, Marcus said, pulling out his wallet and retrieving it. The edges were worn now, the paper soft from being handled. I still don't completely understand it. But it worked somehow. I followed it, and things changed. May I tell you something, Marcus? He nodded. Evelyn's expression shifted, becoming both lighter and heavier at once. 5 years ago, I walked into a restaurant in downtown Seattle. Aurelius. Do you remember it? Marcus went still. Aurelius. His restaurant. The one he'd built from nothing. The one he'd lost. I remember, he said quietly. It was a Thursday evening in March. My husband had died 2 weeks earlier. 52 years of marriage, gone in a heartbeat. Stroke. He was eating breakfast, and then he was on the floor, and then he was gone. Her voice didn't waver, but her hands trembled slightly around her water glass. I was drowning, Marcus. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. Couldn't see the point of any of it anymore. Our children live across the country. Our friends were kind but busy with their own lives. I was alone in a way I'd never been alone before. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. That Thursday, I decided I was done. I'd made all the arrangements. Written the notes. I just wanted one last good meal before I went home and ended it. Evelyn, Marcus whispered. I walked into Aurelius at 8:30. You were doing a special tasting menu that night. 7 courses. I ordered the full experience with wine pairings. I was going to enjoy every bite, and then I was going to go home and take every pill in my medicine cabinet. She met his eyes steadily. But something happened that night. The young chef came out to talk to the tables. You came to mine. You asked how everything was, and I said it was beautiful, and you sat down. Just for a moment. But then that moment became 5 minutes. Then 10. Marcus stared at her, memory rushing back like a flood. He remembered. God, he remembered. An elderly woman dining alone. Looking so sad it had physically hurt to see. He'd been riding high that night. Aurelius had just gotten a glowing review in Seattle magazine. Reservations were booked months out. He was on top of the world. But something about that woman had stopped him. You asked me about the food, Evelyn continued. But then you asked about my life. About whether I was celebrating something. I told you the truth. That I was saying goodbye. You didn't pry. You just listened. And then you told me about your grandmother. About how she'd taught you that food was love made visible. About how every meal was a chance to remind people that life was worth savoring. Her eyes filled with tears, but she kept talking. You stayed at my table for almost an hour, Marcus. You brought me extra courses. You told me stories. You made me laugh for the first time since Robert died. And when I left that night, I didn't go home and take those pills. I went home and slept. Really slept. And when I woke up the next morning, I decided to try. Just one more day. Then another. Then another. Marcus couldn't breathe. He remembered that night, but he hadn't known. Hadn't realized. You saved my life, Evelyn said simply. And you didn't even know it. I don't understand, Marcus managed. If I helped you, then why did you look so sad when you came in here that first night? Because I'd been trying to find you for 5 years. I knew your name but not how to reach you. Aurelius had closed. You'd disappeared. And then 3 months ago, I was walking past this diner in the rain, and I saw you through the window. Looking just as lost and broken as I'd felt that night 5 years ago. She reached across the table and took his hand. You gave me a reason to keep living, Marcus. The least I could do was return the favor. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face and didn't care. The recipe card was just a reminder. You already knew how to create perfect moments. You'd done it for me. You'd just forgotten. But I ruined everything, Marcus said. The restaurant. My reputation. I lost control. I screamed at a food critic in the middle of service. It went viral. I deserved everything that happened after. Maybe, Evelyn said. Or maybe you were a human being having a breakdown under impossible pressure. Maybe you made a mistake and paid for it and needed someone to remind you that mistakes aren't the end of the story. She squeezed his hand. Do you know what I've been doing for the past 5 years, Marcus? I've been paying it forward. Every time I see someone drowning the way I was drowning, I try to throw them a rope. Sometimes it's just a conversation. Sometimes it's money or food or a place to stay. Sometimes it's a silly recipe card that makes them stop and think. How many people? Marcus asked. I stopped counting at 40. You were number 63. Marcus laughed through his tears. Did it work for all of them? No. Some people aren't ready. Some people are too far gone. But enough of them, Marcus. Enough to make it worth trying. They sat in silence for a moment, the diner bustling around them, the rain still falling outside. What you did for me, Evelyn said, you did without knowing the impact. That coffee you bought for that young woman? You'll probably never know what happened because of that kindness. But I promise you, it rippled outward. It always does. Marcus thought about Zara Hayes and her paint-stained fingers. Wondered where she was now. If she was okay. If that $4 coffee had mattered beyond that one morning. So what now? He asked. Evelyn smiled. Now you keep going. You keep creating these perfect moments. You keep feeding people's souls along with their stomachs. You keep being the person your grandmother knew you could be. She finished her soup and pulled out her wallet, but Marcus waved her off just like last time. Still on the house, he said. Then I'll leave you something else. Evelyn reached into her purse and pulled out a small photograph. Faded. Creased from years of handling. It showed a young couple on their wedding day. The man was tall and handsome in a military uniform. The woman was radiant in a simple white dress. That's me and Robert, Evelyn said. 54 years ago. Keep it as a reminder. A reminder of what? That every person who walks through that door has a story. has loves and losses and dreams and fears. And for the brief time they're in your care, you have the chance to make their story a little bit better. Just like you did for me. Marcus took the photograph with trembling hands. Evelyn stood, buttoning her coat. I should go. But I'll come back. Not in 3 months this time. Maybe next week. I'd like to become a regular, if that's all right. I'd like that too. She started toward the door, then paused. Oh, one more thing. That recipe card. You should share it. Pass it on. Let it ripple outward. To who? You'll know when the time is right. The bell chimed as she left, and Marcus sat alone in the booth, holding a photograph of strangers who weren't strangers at all, understanding finally that kindness was never wasted even when you couldn't see where it went. The next Sunday, Marcus started something new. He put up a sign in the diner window, free cooking class. Sundays at 10 a.m. Everyone welcome. 7 people showed up that first week. By week 3, there were 15. By week 5, he had to move the class to the diner itself and do 2 sessions to fit everyone. He taught them his grandmother's recipes. Showed them how to cook with attention and care. Explained that good food didn't have to be complicated or expensive, it just had to be made with presence. Zara Hayes showed up on week 4. Marcus recognized her immediately. The curly hair. The paint stains. You, she said, breaking into a huge smile. You're the coffee guy. Guilty. Do you know what happened because of that coffee? Marcus shook his head. Zara told him about Thomas Reed. About the portrait. About how that one moment of connection had reminded her that art was supposed to be about seeing people, really seeing them. I changed my whole senior thesis because of that day, she said. Instead of abstract landscapes, I started doing portraits of invisible people. Homeless individuals. Street musicians. Bus drivers. People we see every day but never really look at. How did it go? I got into a gallery show. My first real show. It opens next month. Her eyes shone. None of that happens if you don't buy me coffee. You started something. Marcus felt that familiar tightness in his throat. You started something too. You just didn't know it. Over the following weeks, more stories emerged. A woman named Dorothy came to the cooking class and mentioned being saved by a stranger with daisies. A veteran named Thomas showed up and talked about an art student who'd made him feel human again. A nurse named Rebecca stopped by for lunch and told Marcus about a homeless man who'd reminded her why she became a nurse. Piece by piece, the full picture revealed itself. His coffee had bought Zara time and energy. Zara had given Thomas dignity. Thomas had given Rebecca hope. Rebecca had given comfort to a scared child and a ride to a grieving widow. Each act of kindness rippling outward, touching lives in ways none of them had seen. Marcus made copies of the recipe card and left them at every table. Some people threw them away. Others pocketed them with curious expressions. He'd never know which ones would take root. 6 months after Evelyn's second visit, Marcus got a call from a food writer at the Seattle Times. They wanted to do a feature on the Bluebird Diner and its transformation. Marcus almost said no. The last time he'd dealt with food media, it had destroyed his career. But then he thought about Evelyn. About second chances and moving forward and the difference between hiding from your past and learning from it. He said yes. The article ran on a Sunday. It was honest. It mentioned Aurelius. Mentioned the viral incident. Mentioned the fall. But it focused on the resurrection. On what the Bluebird had become. On the community gathering around simple, soulful food made with care. The article mentioned the recipe cards. Explained the concept. Asked readers to try it themselves. Within a week, Marcus had received hundreds of emails. People sharing their own stories of unexpected kindness. Of perfect moments created and received. A movement started, small but real. People leaving extra big tips with notes of encouragement. paying for the order behind them in the drive-thru, sitting with lonely elderly neighbors, teaching free skills to anyone who wanted to learn. Small acts, tiny kindnesses, rippling outward in ways no one could track but everyone could feel. The city felt different, softer, more connected. Or maybe it was the same and Marcus was just finally paying attention. On a Tuesday evening in February, Marcus was prepping for dinner service when Evelyn walked in without her coat this time, the rain having finally stopped. She slid onto a stool at the counter. "The usual?" Marcus asked. "Please." While he cooked her soup, Evelyn pulled out a newspaper. The Seattle Times feature, now 2 months old. "You've started something beautiful," she said. "We started something," Marcus corrected. "I was just the stone you threw in the water." "No, dear. You were always the water. I just reminded you how to reflect the light." Marcus brought her the soup and sat beside her. The dinner rush wouldn't start for another hour. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Anything." "That night at Aurelius, when you decided to keep living, what made the difference? Was it really just our conversation?" Evelyn considered this, stirring her soup thoughtfully. "It was a lot of things. The food, the wine, the beauty of the meal. But mostly it was being seen. You looked at me and saw a person worth your time. Worth an hour of conversation. Worth caring about. When you're drowning, that's everything. Being reminded that you matter. That your story isn't over yet." She took a bite of soup. "That's what you do here now, Marcus. Every day. Every bowl of soup. Every cooking class. Every person who walks through that door. You remind them they matter. That's the real recipe for perfect moments. Seeing people and letting them know they're seen." Marcus looked around the diner. At the customers chatting over their meals. At his staff working with pride and care. At the recipe cards on every table. At the photograph of Evelyn and Robert he'd framed and hung by the register. This wasn't Aurelius. It would never be Aurelius. It was better. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for coming back. For giving me the chance to say thank you properly." "You already thanked me," Evelyn said. 5 years ago. Everything since has just been interest on the debt. Some debt. The best kind. The kind that grows when you share it." They finished their soup in comfortable silence. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, casting golden light across the wet streets. Perfect moment, Marcus thought. A year after Evelyn's first visit, the Bluebird Diner had become something extraordinary. Not famous. Not trendy. Just beloved. The kind of place people brought their kids and their grandparents. Where first dates happened and business deals were made and grief was soothed and joy was celebrated. Marcus taught 3 cooking classes every Sunday now. The diner had a waiting list for Sunday brunch. He'd hired 5 new staff members and was training them all in his grandmother's philosophy. Food is love made visible. He never did go back to fine dining. Never wanted to. This was enough. This was everything. On the anniversary of that rainy August night, Marcus closed the diner early. He set up a long table down the center and invited everyone who'd been part of the journey. Evelyn came, of course. So did Zara Hayes, who brought Thomas Reed as her guest. Rebecca Santos came with her husband. Dorothy came with flowers from her garden. The staff brought their families. Regular customers filled every seat. Marcus cooked his grandmother's minestrone soup. Made enough for everyone. Served it in proper bowls with good bread and real butter. Before they ate, he stood and raised his glass. "A year ago, I was lost. I'd given up on everything that mattered. And then a woman walked through that door in the rain and reminded me who I was supposed to be." He looked at Evelyn, who smiled with tears in her eyes. "She gave me a recipe for perfect moments. It sounded like nonsense. But it changed everything. Because perfect moments aren't complicated. They're just showing up, paying attention, caring about the people in front of you, being kind when you don't have to be. He gestured around the table. Every person here has a story about kindness, about someone who saw them when they needed to be seen, who helped when they didn't have to help, who reminded them that the world could be good. Marcus pulled out the original recipe card, worn almost transparent now from handling. This card has been copied thousands of times. It's in coffee shops and libraries and community centers all over this city. People are using it, sharing it, creating their own perfect moments. He looked at each face around the table. My grandmother used to say that food is love made visible. But so is everything else we do. Every choice, every moment, every small act of grace we offer to strangers in the rain. He raised his glass higher. To Evelyn, to second chances, to the ripple effect of kindness, to perfect moments. To perfect moments, everyone echoed. They ate and talked and laughed deep into the night. Stories spilled out. Connections were made. People who'd been strangers became friends. Marcus watched it all unfold with quiet joy. This was what his grandmother had meant. This communion. This sharing. This reminder that we're all connected, all feeding each other in ways seen and unseen. Late that night, after everyone had gone home, Marcus and Evelyn stood outside the diner. "What's next for you?" she asked. "Keep going. Keep cooking. Keep teaching. Keep creating spaces where people feel seen and cared for." "That's a good life, Marcus." "It is." He paused. "What about you? Are you still out there saving people?" Evelyn smiled. "Always. There's always someone drowning. Always someone who needs a rope." "Will I see you again?" "Every week. I told you I wanted to be a regular." She hugged him, this stranger who'd saved him by letting him save her, and walked off into the night. Marcus locked up the diner and headed home. The streets were quiet. The rain had finally stopped for good. Above him, stars were visible for the first time in weeks. In his pocket, he carried a new recipe card. Not the original. A fresh one he'd written that afternoon. He planned to give it to someone tomorrow. Someone who looked like they needed it. Someone drowning who might be ready to swim. The recipe for perfect moments. It was simple, really. See people. Listen to them. Care about them. Show up. Pay attention. Be kind even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Let your actions ripple outward without needing to know where they go. Trust that kindness always comes back around. Sometimes it takes 5 years. Sometimes it takes 5 minutes. But it always comes back. Marcus walked home through the quiet streets of Seattle, past closed shops and late-night bars, past people heading home from work and couples holding hands and all the ordinary magic of a city at night. He thought about his grandmother, about Evelyn, about Zara and Thomas and Rebecca and Dorothy and all the others whose lives had touched his, about the invisible web connecting everyone, made visible through small acts of grace. Tomorrow he'd open the diner again, make soup, teach a class, hand out recipe cards, create space for perfect moments to unfold. It wasn't the life he'd planned. It was better. Because he'd learned the secret his grandmother had been trying to teach him all along. We don't create perfect moments by chasing perfection. We create them by showing up with open hearts and noticing the people right in front of us. By feeding them, seeing them, reminding them they matter. By being the rope someone throws when we're drowning. And by accepting the rope when it's our turn to need saving. Marcus looked up at the stars and smiled. Perfect moment. Right here. Right now. Every single one.